Chapter 26. Wilks stepped into the bright sunlight, crouched, his carbine pointed to one side of the ship. Nothing. Moto would be trained on the structure in front of them, Brewster to the other side. "How's it look?" he said into the comm. He scanned the area for movement. "Clear," said Tully. "Go," said Wilks. Moto jogged forward, weapon up, as Wilks and Brewster covered her. They were close enough to the dingy grey building that it only took half a minute. Moto leaned against the corner of the unit and crouched there. "Go," said Wilks again. He and Brewster jogged across the dusty landing pad. Adrenaline sparked his senses, his heart thumped. He knew that Ripley and Falk had them covered, but that didn't make a run through open space in unswept territory any more comfortable. Then again, this was what he knew how to do best. It almost felt good. They reached Moto and edged to the door of the building. Wilks held up his hand for the others to stay put behind them. "I'll kick," he said. "Moto, you're high. Brewster, low. On my mark." The three of them stepped into the entry. "Now!" Wilks kicked. The door crashed inward. Brewster sidled into the entry in a crouch, Moto standing. They swept the room left to right, and Wilks took in some air. It was a barracks, and it looked deserted. A row of cots lined the far wall, interspaced with a series of tall cabinets that all stood open and empty. There were no other exits. The room was in disarray, with blankets and articles of clothing scattered about, and the air smelled stale and musty. Dust motes swam in the beams of sunlight and resettled. Whatever had happened, they had missed it by weeks, maybe months. "Looks clean," said Wilks. Better, it felt clean. Brewster straightened up and motioned towards the floor with his rifle. A series of bullet holes and chipped plasticrete ran in a line up the wall behind them. A smashed cot lay nearby. It looked like someone had tried unsuccessfully to barricade the door. "Something went down, but it's old news," said Brewster quietly. "Secured?" said Ripley through the comm. "Yeah," Wilks signed. "Only 4 more to go, and we should check the flyers and the APC." They backed out of the room. 20 minutes later, they were finished. There was a substantial amount of dried blood splashed in the mess hall, evidence of a struggle in most of the structures, acid damage here and there, but no bodies and no apparent threat. Wilks felt the adrenaline seep from his system little by little, but he remained alert. Getting sloppy could cost. As Ripley stood outside the ship and delegated responsibilities to the others, Wilks continued to scan the area. Not having a portable sensor was a bitch, although he found that as he got older, he didn't like to depend on mechanical augmentation as much. Earth had fallen to shit from too much greed and not enough humanity. The machines had just been fuel for the fire. As a young hotshot Marine, he had felt differently about things, but experience had taught him that nothing was infallible. "Fucking middle age," he thought. "Maybe I should take up philosophy when this whole thing is over." If it was ever over. If they made it. The planet had become a dead end for billions of people not so long ago. He had been a dead man walking on stolen time himself. But somewhere along the way, that had changed. He was ready to play his part in the end, to finish it. "Ready," said Ripley. She started towards the hill. "Ready," he replied, but not to anyone in particular. He started after her. They stood at the base of the hill, in front of the gate. The metal door looked as if it had been melted open with a welding device. It sported a huge gaping hole in the middle. Ripley had thought weapons fire when she had seen it from the Kurtz, but the edges of the hole were smooth. She wondered what exactly had gone on in the last hours here, before the scientists had been taken. Wilks stepped into the darkness first. Ripley waited a few beats and then followed, pulled herself through the hole, and took a breath. The air was thick with moisture and the smell of mold. Greyish-green moss and lichens had developed in scraggly patches along the inside of the gate. Nice place. The small room she had stepped into led to a dark corridor. A mechanical door, stuck halfway open, separated the two. "Talk to me, Wilks," she said. "Got a straight walk ahead of you for 10 meters, then a T. The sign says armory on the right and control left. No sign of infestation, and the mold is pretty thick on either branch. I think we're alone." Ripley let out her air and then stepped around the broken door. "You heard him," she said. Moto and Tully came in behind her with the equipment cases. "Let us know, Fork," she said softly. He would keep watch at the gate. Billie, McQuaid, and the doctor were back at the Kurtz. "Gotcha." She directed her light forward as she moved down the dank hall. Wilks stood at the T, weapon up, his face distorted in the swaying light. "You stay here," he said. "I'll check control." His voice echoed with a faintly metallic ring. Wilks moved off down the hall. Ripley kept her weapon trained towards the armory, although Wilks was right. It didn't look like anyone had been here in months. Anyone, or anything, she added mentally. Moto and Tully waited with her. "Maybe the firing sequence was interrupted by some natural phenomenon," said Moto. She poked at a strand of damp moss on the wall. "These weapons were never meant to withstand exposure to the elements." Wilks rejoined them. "Clear," he said. "Not a real complicated maze. Hall runs straight 20 meters and then elbows into control. Let me check the other side and we're set." "I'll cover," said Ripley. "Tully, Moto, you go ahead." Ripley clutched her weapon with damp palms. Androids could sweat after all, and waited for Wilks in the murky stillness. She was ready for this to be over with. She was tired of being looked to for answers. Billie was right. She did need to finish what she had started. But when it was done, she had a lot more shit to deal with. It seemed as though it would never end. Wilks moved back to join her. "That didn't take long," she said. "Same setup on this side. Only the door is locked and sealed. Hasn't been opened in a while either. I think the bombs are safe." She smiled. "Great. Safe bombs." Wilks chuckled. "Yeah, funny. Hey!" Moto crackled into their ears. "Looks like we got a little more than corrosion down here." She sounded worried. "I think someone tried to put a stop to this countdown permanently." Billie sat in the control room of the Kurtz and listened to Ripley's report. "And we've localized the problem, but it's going to take longer than I'd hoped. Everything has been dislinked, and as far as we can tell, the main set of hardwiring was bollocksed." Her voice was punctuated with heavy static. The comms weren't designed to send or receive through so many tons of rock. "How long?" said Billie. "We'll be lucky to get out of here by dark." She continued to outline the situation, but Billie tuned it out. The sun was still high above. Night was a good 6 hours away. Plenty of time. She stood and stretched leisurely as Ripley cut off. "I'm going to take them some food packets over," Billie said. "That should cheer them up." McQuaid grinned. "Or they might decide to blow us all to hell." "Just don't give them any of the stir-fry and we're probably safe," said Jones. "Suicide was on my mind when I ate dinner." Billie laughed. "Want company?" said McQuaid. Jones could watch the sensors. "Nah." She hoped she sounded casual. "I'll only be a minute." She walked back to the dining hall and gathered some of the self-heating packets and some utensils. She also stopped by the weapons stock for a few extra magazines before heading to the lower deck. Taking a flyer wouldn't jeopardize the mission. If she didn't make it back in time, well, she would just have to. She didn't expect them to wait for her. Billie walked out of the APC dock and squinted in the bright light. The air was sweet and cool against her skin, a far cry from the canned, recycled stuff that she was accustomed to. Insects and birds sang their songs in the trees around the compound. It was beautiful, what was left of it. The firepower that the others were currently setting up would take out a big chunk of this entire region, as Ripley had explained it, but not right away. 6 months? Falk had said. Why so fucking long? It's a big planet. The aliens are all over it. Assuming they can swim. Better, of course, if they can't and they drown. It'll take 3 or 4 months for them to get here. They could be 20,000 kilometers away, halfway around the planet. Allowing time for them to stop and eat and pee, 6 months should be plenty. That had brought up a bunch of other questions. Why was the Super Queen calling them? Maybe whoever made these war toys was coming to collect them. Somebody, Wilks, had said. Would they stay here once they arrived? Nobody knew. They had to go with what they had. They'd baited the trap, and they had to allow time for the rats to get to the cheese. Billie shook the memory. Falk raised a hand as she approached. Brought you some lunch, she said. Oh boy. He looked less than thrilled. You gonna join us for the poisoning? Nope. I thought I'd see if I could scavenge some supplies from a few of the buildings. Falk took the assortment of foil pouches from her with a frown. I don't think that's such a good idea, he said. Does Ripley know? Billie shrugged. Tell her if you want. I'm armed, the compound is empty, and McQuaid is watching for activity. She tapped her headset. Besides, I'm sick of sitting on my ass. Thought I'd make myself useful. I hear that, said Falk. Just be careful. She smiled and walked away. The flyers were hidden from Falk's vantage point, 2 buildings away. She stepped out of view and picked up her pace a bit. What are you doing, Billie? McQuaid's voice spoke into her ear. Falk spoke before she did. Trying to find us some decent food instead of this swill, he said. Surely you can't object to that. Thank you, Falk. She reached the first ship and looked inside. Wilks and the others had left the hatches popped open. The landhopper was tiny, made to accommodate a few people, with only minimal space and scant supplies. Her heart sank when she saw the ripped wires and broken plastic of the console. There's nothing in those ships but emergency rations, said McQuaid. Why don't you just get back here? I don't like the idea of you roaming around by yourself, and you could mess up my readings. The Kurtz isn't out of food. I'm a big girl, said Billie, as she moved to the second flyer. She kept her movements casual. If McQuaid saw her run, he'd sound an alarm. I was actually looking for some more tools. "Billie, get back to the ship now," said Ripley. The edge in her voice was sharp, even through the static. So much for playing it safe. Billie stepped into the second flyer and looked around. It seemed undamaged. She slid the hatch closed behind her and hurried to the pilot's seat. A few switches and the ship hummed to life. "Damn it, Billie, talk to me. What the hell are you doing? You can't leave. We don't have time for this." Billie ignored Ripley and fed the access codes and coordinates into the small computer. Thank Buddha for small favors, like nil security on the little ship. Plenty of fuel, automatic everything. "Billie, wait!" It was Wilks. "I'll go with you. Just hold on a minute." At least he sounded more worried than angry. "Sorry," she said. "This is the only way. I know she's not dead. I'll be back before dark, if I can." Billie toggled the user-friendly controls, and the flyer began to lift. She understood most of the buttons and hoped that what she didn't know wouldn't hurt her. She yanked the headset off and threw it down as Ripley and the captain shouted at her, and the small ship pivoted in the air. She knew they were pissed, but they didn't need her to finish. Ripley's hatred was behind everything the older woman did. Billie was motivated by a feeling that seemed just as strong. Love? She strapped in with a silent prayer as the flyer rocketed south. Please let this work.